A cardiac monitor flatlines at 3:26 a.m. Nurse Sarah Monroe signs out of her shift and walks alone through the empty hospital parking lot, her shadow stretching beneath flickering lights. Something in her eyes says she doesn't plan to return. 7 hours later, her car is found 180 miles away, near an abandoned gas station in Sweetwater, Texas. The engine still warm, the passenger seat soaked with blood. Her phone records a chilling message: if something happens to me, look in locker 12 at the hospital. What secret was worth her life? And why is a supposedly deceased 7-year-old girl asking about the woman who promised to take her to see the ocean? Detective Ethan Brooks was just doing his job when he found Sarah's blood-stained ID badge hanging in the hospital hallway. Now he's uncovering a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of Covenant Medical Center, where patients officially die on operating tables only to walk out days later, where experimental treatments happen in hidden basement labs, and where those who ask too many questions simply disappear. Follow this heart-wrenching story of sacrifice, corruption, and the lengths one woman will go to save a child no one else cared about. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The cardiac monitor's steady beep echoed through the quiet corridor of Covenant Medical Center's 3rd floor. Sarah Monroe stared at the screen, watching the rhythmic peaks and valleys that signified life continuing, at least for tonight. Her reflection in the darkened window showed a woman barely recognizable to herself. Dark circles under once bright eyes, honey brown hair hastily pulled into a messy bun, and the perpetual crease between her eyebrows that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Vitals stable, pain level at 3, she murmured, recording the information in the patient chart. Administered 5 mg morphine at 3:12 a.m. The night shift was almost over. Thank God. Sarah checked her watch. 3:26 a.m. Her fingers trembled slightly as she signed the final nursing log. 12 hours on her feet, 3 code blues, and 1 patient who'd looked at her with terrified eyes and whispered, "Am I going to die tonight?" before finally drifting to sleep. Just another Tuesday in the oncology ward. "You heading out?" Nurse Doreen Jenkins asked, her weathered face appearing in the doorway. At 62, Doreen had been at Covenant longer than some of the equipment. Her eyes narrowed, studying Sarah with the same assessment skills she used on patients. "You look like hell, sweetie." Sarah forced a smile. "Thanks for the compliment. I mean it. When's the last time you had a proper night's sleep?" Doreen leaned against the doorframe, concern etching deeper lines into her face. "This is the 3rd double shift you've pulled this week." "I need the money," Sarah replied, the lie slipping out effortlessly. She'd gotten good at lying these past few months. Doreen shook her head. "Nobody needs money that badly. Not worth killing yourself over." "If only you knew," Sarah thought, sliding her pen into her scrub pocket. "I'm fine," she said, gathering her things. Her fingers brushed against the small, rectangular outline in her pocket, the USB drive that felt heavier than its physical weight. "Just tired." "Well, get some rest. Dr. Hale's scheduled for early rounds tomorrow, and you know how he gets when staff look exhausted. Says it unsettles the patients." Doreen rolled her eyes. At the mention of Dr. Marcus Hale, Sarah's heart quickened. She kept her expression neutral, years of nursing practice keeping her vital signs from betraying her. "Right. Wouldn't want to unsettle anyone. You sure you're okay to drive home? You look pale." "I'm fine," Sarah repeated more firmly this time. "See you tomorrow." The lie tasted bitter. There would be no tomorrow, not at Covenant, not after tonight. Sarah walked through the quiet hallways, footsteps echoing against the polished floor. The hospital at night was like a different universe, a liminal space between life and death, reality and nightmare. Tonight, it felt particularly oppressive, as if the walls themselves were watching her. In the empty elevator, she stared at her reflection in the brushed steel doors. 28 years old, and she felt ancient. A lifetime ago, she'd entered nursing school with idealistic dreams of helping people, saving lives. Now, she knew some lives weren't meant to be saved. They were meant to be exploited. The elevator doors opened to the basement-level parking garage. Sarah clutched her bag tighter as she walked between the rows of cars, her footsteps echoing. The garage was nearly empty at this hour, just a few vehicles belonging to the night shift staff. She reached her 2012 Honda Civic, its faded blue paint job barely visible under the flickering fluorescent lights. The car had been with her since nursing school. Reliable, unassuming, perfect for disappearing. Sarah threw her bag onto the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. She sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles whitened. The security camera mounted on a concrete pillar swiveled slightly, its red light blinking like a mechanical eye. She turned the key and the engine sputtered to life. In the rearview mirror, she could see the hospital looming above the parking structure, a modern fortress of glass and concrete where miracles happened daily and where monsters wore white coats and surgical masks. Sarah took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. The clock on her dashboard read 3:31 a.m. She put the car in reverse, backed out, and drove toward the exit. As she approached the security gate, she swiped her employee card one last time. The barrier lifted. A final goodbye from Covenant Medical Center. Sarah accelerated onto the empty street, the hospital shrinking in her rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. The night was cold for April in Texas, unusually so. Sarah drove with the windows up, the radio off. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic sound of her tires on asphalt and her own measured breathing. She drove east out of Lubbock, away from the city lights, into the vast darkness of rural Texas. Highway 84 stretched before her like a ribbon of black silk under the moonlight. Few cars passed her at this hour. A long-haul trucker, headlights blazing. A police cruiser that made her heart skip until it continued past without slowing. After an hour of driving, Sarah pulled over at a deserted rest stop. Her hands were shaking too badly to continue. She reached for her phone and opened the voice memo app, hesitating before pressing record. "This is Sarah Monroe," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a registered nurse at Covenant Medical Center in Lubbock. What I've discovered there..." She paused, swallowing hard. "If something happens to me, look in locker 12 at the hospital. The evidence is there. They've been..." A sudden flash of headlights swept across her car. Sarah's head snapped up, her heart pounding. A black SUV had pulled into the rest stop, parking several spaces away. The driver's door opened. Sarah dropped the phone, fumbling to start her car. The engine roared to life just as a figure approached, their face obscured by darkness. "Sarah!" a voice called out. "Wait!" But she was already pulling away, tires squealing on the asphalt. The voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't risk it, couldn't trust anyone. She drove faster now, watching the rearview mirror. The SUV's headlights appeared behind her, gaining distance. Sarah's hands clenched the wheel as she pushed the Civic to its limits, the needle climbing past 90 miles an hour. The road to Sweetwater stretched endless before her, a desolate highway through Texas plains. Her phone, still recording, had fallen to the floor of the passenger side. "Please," she whispered to no one in particular. "Please let me make it." The headlights behind her grew larger. Sarah's breath came in gasps now. She was so close, just a few more miles to the abandoned gas station where they had agreed to meet, where safety waited, where Maddie waited. A sound like thunder cracked the night. Sarah's car swerved violently as the back window shattered. Pain bloomed in her shoulder, warm and wet. The steering wheel jerked from her hands, and the world spun in a kaleidoscope of headlights and darkness. The last thing Sarah saw was the road rushing up to meet her, and her final thought wasn't of the evidence or the conspiracy or even her own life. It was of a little girl with green eyes who trusted her to come back. 7 hours later, Detective Ethan Brooks stood in the cool morning light, staring at a blue Honda Civic crumpled against a fence post. The car had been found by a rancher, engine still warm, driver's door open. Blood soaked the passenger seat, but there was no body. Ethan crouched down, noticing a phone on the floor of the car. The screen showed a voice recording app still running, the file almost 7 hours long. He pressed play. Through the static came a woman's frightened voice. "If something happens to me, look in locker 12 at the hospital." The recording continued with only the sound of wind and distant traffic, until a sharp crack and a scream cut through the silence. Ethan looked up at the abandoned gas station looming in the distance, its faded sign barely readable. Sweetwater, last stop. Something told him this was just the beginning. The fluorescent lights of Covenant Medical Center buzzed overhead, casting everyone in a sickly pallor that matched the mood. Word of Sarah Monroe's disappearance had spread through the hospital like a virus, in hushed whispers between nurses changing shifts, in sidelong glances from doctors reviewing charts, in the deliberate silence that fell whenever someone walked by her empty locker. Detective Ethan Brooks moved through the corridor with measured steps, his weathered leather shoes echoing against the polished floor. At 43, he carried himself with the weary vigilance of someone who'd seen too much yet couldn't look away. His rumpled suit jacket and 5 o'clock shadow spoke of the sleepless night he'd spent reviewing the evidence from Sarah's abandoned car. "They're saying she had a breakdown," whispered a young nurse to her colleague as Ethan passed. "Working too many doubles, you know." "I heard it was guilt," the other replied, lowering her voice further. "Something about a patient who died on her watch." Ethan pretended not to hear, but he filed away every word. In his 20 years with the Lubbock Police Department, he'd learned that rumors often carried fragments of truth, like seeds in the wind. "Detective Brooks?" A hospital administrator approached, clipboard in hand. "I'm Diane Mercer, Chief of Staff. We've prepared access to Nurse Monroe's locker as requested." Her smile was professionally concerned, but her eyes were calculating, assessing. Ethan had interviewed enough people to recognize the look of someone balancing cooperation with self-preservation. "I appreciate that," he replied, following her through a maze of corridors. Overhead, a robotic voice announced, "Emergency in Ward 3, Code Blue, emergency in Ward 3. Medical personnel rushed past them, a choreographed chaos of urgency. Life and death continued, regardless of one missing nurse. "Here we are," Diane said, stopping at a row of metal lockers in the staff area. "Number 12, as requested. Security has already removed the lock." Ethan noticed the yellow tape stretched across the locker door, not police tape, but hospital security tape. Someone had been here before him. "Who else has accessed this locker since Sarah's disappearance?" he asked, pulling on latex gloves. Diane hesitated. "Standard procedure. Security conducts an initial assessment when an employee goes missing." "And what did they find?" "Nothing of note," she replied too quickly. "Just personal items." Ethan studied her face for a moment before turning to the locker. "Thank you, Ms. Mercer. I can take it from here." She lingered, clearly reluctant to leave. "Detective, I should mention that Dr. Hale, our chief of surgery, has expressed interest in being updated about the investigation. Sarah worked closely with his team." "I'll keep that in mind," Ethan said, non-committally, waiting until Diane finally walked away before turning his attention to the locker. The metal door creaked as he pulled it open. At first glance, it looked ordinary. A jacket hanging on a hook, a pair of worn sneakers, a small mirror stuck to the inside of the door. But Ethan immediately noticed the precision of it all. Too neat, too organized. This wasn't a locker someone used daily. It was a locker someone had prepared. Behind the jacket, he found it, a metal box, roughly the size of a hardback novel, secured with a combination lock. The box was taped to the back wall of the locker with strips of surgical tape, hidden but meant to be found by the right person. Ethan carefully removed the box and examined the lock. 3 digits. He thought about Sarah Monroe, 28 years old, single, dedicated nurse, according to her file. What numbers would matter to her? He tried her birth month and day. 042. Nothing. He tried the hospital wing where she worked. 304. Nothing. Then he remembered the voice message on her phone. "If something happens to me, look in locker 12 at the hospital." Ethan tried 326, the timestamp from her final shift log. The lock clicked open. Inside the metal box lay a neat stack of papers, nursing notes, patient charts, medication logs, all with highlighted sections and careful annotations in neat handwriting. Beneath these was a worn manila folder labeled simply Surgical Report 14B, Death Manipulation. Ethan's pulse quickened as he opened the folder. Inside was a detailed surgical report for a cardiac procedure performed 6 months ago. The patient, Douglas Farrington, 62, was listed as deceased during operation due to unforeseen complications. But paperclipped to this report was a hospital discharge form dated 2 days later, showing the same patient released in stable condition. "What the hell?" Ethan murmured, flipping through more documents. Similar discrepancies appeared throughout. Deaths recorded in surgical notes, followed by discharge papers, follow-up appointments, even billing records for patients who were supposedly dead. At the bottom of the box lay a photograph, Sarah Monroe, standing beside an older man in surgical scrubs. The man's arm was around her shoulder in what appeared to be a mentoring gesture, but Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked trapped. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Celebration dinner, Dr. Hale's promotion to chief of surgery." The man in the photo had cold eyes that stared through the camera rather than at it. Dr. Marcus Hale, chief of surgery, the same man who had expressed interest in the investigation. As Ethan carefully returned the items to the box, a soft voice spoke behind him. She knew they would come for her eventually. Ethan turned to find an elderly nurse standing in the doorway, her hands fidgeting with her ID badge. Her name tag read, Doreen Jenkins, RN, 35 years of service. "Nurse Jenkins," Ethan said, keeping his voice low. "Did you know Sarah Monroe well?" The older woman glanced nervously down the corridor before stepping closer. "Well enough to know she wasn't crazy and she didn't run away because of guilt. Sarah was a good nurse. Too good, maybe." "What do you mean?" Doreen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Detective. Before she disappeared, she told me someone was altering medical records, patient charts, surgical outcomes. She said if she ever went missing, it was because she'd discovered too much." Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. "Did she mention who?" The elderly nurse shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "She was scared, really scared. Said she had evidence but needed more time." She glanced at the box in Ethan's hands. Whatever she found in those records must have been worth killing for. The overhead speaker crackled. "Dr. Hale to OR2. Dr. Marcus Hale to OR2. Doreen stiffened at the name. "I should go. They'll notice I'm missing." "Wait," Ethan said, pulling out his card. "If you remember anything else, anything at all." "I won't," she cut him off, refusing to take the card. "And if you're smart, detective, you'll forget this conversation happened." She hurried away, leaving Ethan alone with the metal box and a growing sense that Sarah Monroe hadn't simply disappeared. She'd been silenced. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Detective Ethan Brooks' cramped office at the Lubbock Police Department, casting striped shadows across the surgical report spread on his desk. He'd been staring at it for hours, coffee gone cold beside him, the words blurring together, yet revealing an undeniable pattern. Patient Douglas Farrington, dead on the operating table at 2:17 p.m., according to the surgical notes, then miraculously discharged 2 days later with a clean bill of health. A medical miracle? Or something far more sinister? Ethan rubbed his eyes, the lack of sleep catching up with him. The walls of his office were closing in, plastered with photos of Sarah Monroe's abandoned car, the blood-stained passenger seat, the voice recording transcript, and the documents from the metal box. Fragments of a puzzle he couldn't quite piece together. "You look like hell, Brooks," said Lieutenant Garcia, leaning against the doorframe. Her sharp eyes took in the evidence wall. "Tell me you've got something solid on the missing nurse case, not just conspiracy theories." Ethan picked up the surgical report. "It's all here, Lieutenant. Patients declared dead during surgery, then walking out the front door days later. Sarah Monroe found these discrepancies and documented everything. And you think this is why she disappeared?" Garcia's skepticism was evident. "I think it's why someone made her disappear," Ethan corrected, standing up to stretch his aching back. "I need to talk to Dr. Hale." Garcia's expression hardened. "Marcus Hale, the chief of surgery, the man who saved the mayor's life last year and whose family donated the new pediatric wing? The very same. Brooks, tread carefully. The Hales have been Lubbock royalty for generations. You start throwing accusations without ironclad evidence, and we'll both be directing traffic at high school football games till retirement." Ethan gathered the papers into his worn leather briefcase. "I'm not making accusations. I'm asking questions. There's a difference. Not to people like the Hales," Garcia warned, but she stepped aside to let him pass. "Keep me updated. And Brooks?" Her voice softened slightly. "Watch your back. Missing persons cases don't usually come with blood-soaked car seats." The drive back to Covenant Medical Center took 20 minutes, enough time for Ethan to rehearse his approach. He needed to gauge Dr. Hale's reactions without revealing too much of what he knew. It was a delicate dance, one he'd performed countless times in his career, but never with stakes that felt so personally high. Something about Sarah Monroe's voice on that recording haunted him. The fear, yes, but also the determination. Dr. Marcus Hale's office occupied prime real estate on the hospital's top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling Texas landscape. The antechamber was decorated with awards, diplomas, and photographs of Hale with various celebrities and politicians, a shrine to his own importance. Detective Brooks, Dr. Hale greeted him with practiced warmth, rising from behind an immaculate glass desk. At 63, he maintained the trim physique of a man who controlled everything in his life, including his body. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his surgical hands manicured and smooth. What an unexpected pleasure. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment, Dr. Hale. Anything to help our fine police department. Hale gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. Coffee? I just had my assistant brew a fresh pot. It's Colombian, single origin. That would be nice, thank you. Ethan accepted the offered cup, noticing how Hale poured it himself rather than calling his assistant, a calculated display of humility from a man unaccustomed to serving others. The coffee was indeed excellent, rich, and aromatic, a stark contrast to the police station sludge he'd been subsisting on. I understand you're investigating Sarah Monroe's disappearance, Hale said, settling back into his chair. Troubling business. She was a valuable member of our surgical team. Was. Ethan noted the past tense. Hale's smile didn't falter. A figure of speech, detective. We're all hoping for her safe return. When did you last see Nurse Monroe? I believe it was the morning before her disappearance. She assisted on a valve replacement. Performed admirably, as always. Hale took a careful sip of his coffee. Sarah was talented, dedicated, perhaps too dedicated, if I may speak frankly. Please do. She worked excessive hours, took on additional shifts. In our profession, detective, burnout is a real concern. Sarah was... Hale paused, selecting his words with surgical precision. Intense. Sometimes I worried she was pushing herself too hard. Any idea why she would drive to an abandoned gas station near Sweetwater in the middle of the night? Something flickered in Hale's eyes. Surprise, or perhaps concern that Ethan knew this detail. Before his professional mask returned. I couldn't say. Sarah kept to herself outside of work. Ethan removed the surgical report from his briefcase, watching Hale's reaction. I'd like to ask about patient 14B, Douglas Farrington. According to this report, he died during a procedure you performed 6 months ago. That sounds correct, Hale replied smoothly. Aortic dissection. We did everything possible, but sometimes, despite our best efforts, patients don't survive. Then perhaps you can explain why Mr. Farrington was discharged 2 days later, very much alive. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of an antique clock on Hale's bookshelf. The doctor's expression remained neutral, but Ethan noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. There must be some mistake in the records, Hale finally said. Administrative error, perhaps. Our new electronic system has had growing pains. This isn't the only discrepancy, Ethan pressed. Sarah Monroe documented several cases with similar irregularities. Hale set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Detective, Sarah was unstable. She worked too much, slept too little. Sometimes she would fixate on perceived problems, invent connections where none existed. It made her feel important. Did she discuss these concerns with you? She tried to, once. Hale's voice took on a paternal tone. I suggested she take some time off, perhaps speak with someone in our mental health department. She didn't take it well. The implication was clear. Sarah was unstable, her concerns delusional. It was a textbook discrediting strategy, one Ethan had seen countless times from guilty parties. I'll need to verify these records with hospital administration, Ethan said, gathering his papers. Of course. Hale's smile returned. Diane Mercer will assist you with anything you need. But detective, he leaned forward slightly. I would advise discretion. Patient confidentiality is paramount, and unfounded allegations could damage this institution's reputation, an institution that serves thousands of people in our community. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Ethan thanked him for the coffee and left, feeling Hale's eyes on his back as he exited. In the hallway, he stopped at a bulletin board displaying the hospital's staff recognition wall. Among the photos of employees of the month and service anniversaries, Sarah Monroe's ID badge hung from a small pin, apparently part of a memorial for her disappearance. But something caught Ethan's attention. The edge of the badge was stained with what looked like dried blood. As rain began to patter against the hospital windows, Ethan returned to his car and reached for the small voice recorder in his pocket. He played back Sarah's final message once more, listening for anything he might have missed. Through the static and road noise came her frightened voice. "They're using the deaths to hide something. And one name appears in all the records: Maddie." Ethan looked back at the imposing structure of Covenant Medical Center, wondering what secrets were hidden within its sterile walls, and who Maddie was. The basement archives of Covenant Medical Center smelled of dust and forgotten promises. Ethan's flashlight beam cut through the dimness, illuminating rows of filing cabinets that stretched into the shadows. He'd convinced a sympathetic records clerk to grant him after-hours access, claiming he needed to verify details for the investigation without disrupting hospital operations. The truth was simpler. He didn't trust what might happen to these records if he made an official request. "Maddie," he muttered to himself, running his fingers along cabinet labels. "Who are you?" The name had become an obsession since he'd heard it on Sarah's recording. He'd searched the hospital's electronic database, finding nothing, which meant whatever or whoever Maddie was, the information existed only on paper, hidden away from digital footprints. The pediatric records section was organized chronologically. Ethan worked backward from the current year, scanning names with methodical patience. An hour passed, then two. His back ached from bending over the files, and doubt began to creep in. Perhaps Maddie wasn't a patient at all, but a code word, or... His hand froze on a thin file labeled Harper, Madeline A. He pulled it out, heart racing as he flipped it open. The photograph clipped to the inside cover showed a small girl with delicate features and startlingly green eyes that seemed too old for her 7 years. Her blonde hair was thin, her skin pale, the hallmarks of serious illness. Diagnosis: acute lymphoblastic leukemia, aggressive subtype. Prognosis: poor, estimated survival 3 to 6 months without experimental intervention. Treatment: standard chemotherapy protocols failed. Approved for Trial 14B under Dr. Marcus Hale. Ethan flipped through the sparse treatment notes, medical terminology blurring together until he reached the final entry, dated 4 months ago. Patient expired during emergency transfusion procedure. Cardiac arrest, unresponsive to resuscitation efforts. Time of death: 3:47 p.m. Body released to Hospital Research Department for previously authorized scientific donation. No autopsy required per research protocol agreement. Beneath this clinical accounting of a child's death was a handwritten note in different ink. Death certificate processing delayed, awaiting final research protocol clearance. But there was something odd about the file, a striking absence. Unlike other deceased patient files he'd examined, there was no attached death certificate. No formal record of Madeline Harper's passing existed in the system. Ethan photographed every page with his phone before carefully returning the file to its place. The mystery was deepening, not clarifying. Why would Sarah Monroe risk her life over the death of a leukemia patient? And why would that death need to be concealed? The answer, he suspected, was that Madeline Harper hadn't died at all. Morning found Ethan parked outside the Lubbock Children's Home, a red brick building with a small playground visible through a chain-link fence. According to county records, Madeline Harper had been placed here after her mother's death from a drug overdose 2 years earlier. No father was listed on her birth certificate. The director, a harried woman named Mrs. Patel, greeted him in an office decorated with children's artwork. "Detective Brooks," she said, offering a firm handshake. "How can the Children's Home assist the police department today?" Ethan kept his approach vague. "I'm following up on a missing persons case that might connect to one of your residents, past or present." Mrs. Patel's professional smile didn't waver, but wariness entered her eyes. "Our children's privacy is protected by state regulations. I'd need to see a court order for specific information." "I understand completely," Ethan assured her. "I'm not asking for records yet, just confirmation of residence. Does Madeline Harper currently live here?" The director's hesitation was brief but noticeable. No resident by that name is currently in our care. Was she previously here? 7 years old, blonde hair? Mrs. Patel stood, signaling the end of their conversation. Detective, without proper documentation, I cannot discuss former residents. Many of our children have complicated backgrounds, often involving domestic situations or protective custody arrangements. Ethan recognized the diplomatic shutdown for what it was. He thanked her and left his card, knowing she probably wouldn't call. As he walked back to his car, a small commotion near the playground caught his attention. A group of children were being led inside for lunch, supervised by 2 caregivers. One child had stopped to tie her shoe, falling behind the others. Ethan felt a jolt of recognition. Though her hair was now covered by a blue knit cap, he recognized the delicate features and distinctive green eyes from the hospital file. Madeline Harper, very much alive. He approached slowly, careful not to appear threatening. The girl looked up as his shadow fell across the pavement. "Hi there," Ethan said gently. "Need help with that shoe?" She shook her head, thin fingers working at the laces. "I can do it myself. Ms. Sarah taught me how." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Sarah? Is she your friend?" The girl nodded, finishing the bow with careful concentration. "She visits me when no one's looking, brings me books and jello." She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "The green kind, not the red. Red has artificial coloring that's bad for my blood." "When did you see Miss Sarah last?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice casual. Madeline's face clouded. "A long time ago. She promised to come back, but..." Her small shoulders lifted in a shrug that carried too much understanding of adult disappointment. A caregiver noticed them and hurried over. "Maggie, you know you're not supposed to talk to strangers." She gave Ethan a suspicious glare. "Detective Brooks, Lubbock Police," he said, showing his badge. "Just making sure she was okay." She was alone. "Her name is Maggie Wilson," the caregiver said pointedly, taking the child's hand. "And she's fine. Come on, Maggie, lunch is getting cold." As they walked away, the little girl looked back over her shoulder. "My name is Maddie," she said, with quiet defiance. "Tia Sarah says when I get better, she's gonna take me to see the ocean." Ethan watched them disappear inside the building, his mind racing. Madeline Harper, officially deceased, was alive and being hidden under a false name. And Sarah Monroe, the missing nurse, had been visiting her secretly. He returned to his car, sitting motionless behind the wheel as he processed this revelation. The official record said Madeline Harper had died during a transfusion. But here she was, alive, using an alias, with bandages visible under her sleeve where an IV might recently have been. Why would a hospital falsify a child's death? As he started the engine, Ethan didn't notice the black van parked across the street or the camera lens capturing his every move through tinted windows. The paperwork landed on Ethan's desk with the finality of a judge's gavel. Court Order Ur 457B. Immediate cessation of investigation into medical records at Covenant Medical Center. The legal language was dense, but the message was crystal clear. He was being shut down. "What the hell is this?" Ethan demanded, waving the document at Lieutenant Garcia. She stood in his office doorway, arms crossed, looking as unhappy as he felt. "Came down from the DA's office 15 minutes ago. Hospital's lawyers claimed you're interfering with patient confidentiality laws and jeopardizing sensitive medical research. This is bullshit, and you know it." Ethan tossed the papers aside. "I found her, Garcia. Madeline Harper, the girl from Sarah Monroe's recordings. She's alive, living at Lubbock Children's Home under a fake name, even though hospital records show she died 4 months ago." Garcia closed the office door and lowered her voice. "Look, Brooks, I believe you. But this case just got radioactive. The DA got calls from 3 county commissioners and a state senator this morning." "Hale," Ethan muttered. "It's got to be him pulling strings. Doesn't matter who it is. The point is, they've got the legal high ground for now." She paused, studying his face. "What's this really about, Ethan? You've worked missing persons for years, seen plenty of cases go cold. Why are you so invested in this nurse?" Ethan stared at the evidence wall, at Sarah Monroe's hospital ID photo. Her eyes seemed to follow him, asking for justice. Because she knew the risks and still tried to save that little girl. Because someone's making people disappear, and no one seems to care except me. "I care," Garcia said firmly. But we have to play this smart. Take a few days off, let things cool down. Don't do anything stupid. After she left, Ethan sat in the quiet of his office, the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead. The investigation was officially blocked, but something deep in his gut wouldn't let him walk away. 20 years of police work had taught him to trust that feeling. His cell phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your apartment isn't safe. They know you've been to the children's home." Heart pounding, he tried calling back. Disconnected. Untraceable. Ethan grabbed his jacket and left the station, scanning the parking lot for unfamiliar vehicles. Nothing seemed out of place, but the hair on the back of his neck stood up nonetheless. The warning was clear. He was being watched. He drove home, taking a circuitous route, doubling back several times to ensure he wasn't followed. His apartment building was quiet in the late afternoon, most residents still at work. Ethan approached cautiously, gun drawn, and entered through the side door. His door was locked, deadbolt secured just as he'd left it. But something felt wrong. He inserted his key with deliberate slowness, pushed the door open, and swept the room with his weapon. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The coffee cup he'd left on the counter that morning. The case files spread across his dining table. The television remote on the couch cushion. Except the remote was on the left cushion. He always left it on the right. Someone had been here. Ethan cleared each room methodically, finding nothing obviously disturbed. But when he reached the bedroom, he noticed an envelope on the floor, as if it had been slid under his door and kicked underneath the bed in a hasty search. The envelope was blank, sealed with clear tape. Inside was a single photograph, blurry as if taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. It showed Sarah Monroe, alive, standing on a dirt road. Her face was partially turned away from the camera, but it was unmistakably her. Behind her, a weathered wooden sign read, "Sweetwater, 3 miles." Ethan flipped the photo over. Written in neat feminine handwriting was a message. She didn't run away. She was taken. The truth is in the isolation room. He sat heavily on the edge of his bed, studying the photograph. The timestamp in the corner showed it was taken 3 days after Sarah's disappearance. She had survived whatever happened at the abandoned gas station, at least initially. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "Don't trust hospital security footage. It's been altered." As darkness fell outside his window, Ethan made his decision. Court order or not, he was going back to Covenant Medical Center. If the answers were in the isolation room, that's where he'd go. The hospital's night shift operated with a skeleton crew, most administrative personnel long gone. Ethan used his badge to gain entry through the emergency department, claiming he needed to follow up on an assault case. The tired security guard barely glanced at his credentials. The isolation rooms were located in the hospital's west wing, reserved for patients with infectious diseases or compromised immune systems. Ethan moved through the quiet corridors with deliberate purpose, nodding to the occasional staff member as if he belonged there. According to the hospital directory, isolation rooms 1-4 were on the second floor, rooms 5 to 8 on the third. But the directory made no mention of a room beyond that. Strange for a modern medical facility. On a hunch, Ethan took the service elevator to the basement level. The doors opened to a dimly lit corridor with exposed pipes running along the ceiling. A sign on the wall pointed toward maintenance and storage, but a third arrow indicated restricted access, authorized personnel only. He followed the restricted access signs to a heavy door with a keycard reader. This would normally be the end of the line, but Ethan had come prepared. From his pocket, he retrieved a keycard he'd quietly borrowed from the security office during his previous visit, a master access card that opened every door in the building. The reader beeped green, and the door unlocked with a soft click. Beyond lay a sterile white corridor that looked nothing like the unfinished basement surrounding it. The floor was polished linoleum, the walls freshly painted. Motion-activated lights illuminated his path as he moved forward. At the end of the corridor stood another door, this one labeled simply isolation. No room number, no further identification. Ethan swiped the card again. This time a small screen requested a 4-digit code. He thought of Sarah Monroe, of the surgical reports, of Madeline Harper. On a hunch, he entered 1-4B0, the trial number from Maddie's file. Access denied. He tried again, 0326, the time from Sarah's final shift. The door unlocked. Inside, Ethan found not a patient room, but a research laboratory. Computer equipment lined one wall, surrounding a central examination table with restraints. Medical equipment stood silent sentinel around the perimeter. Monitoring devices, IV stands, and machines whose purpose he couldn't identify. He moved to the computers, finding most of them password protected. But one monitor displayed a screensaver of rotating file names. Subject 14A, Subject 14B, Subject 14C. Ethan clicked on 14B, and the screen filled with medical charts and a patient photograph. Sarah Monroe's face stared back at him. Beneath her photo, a clinical designation. Sarah Monroe, experimental subject. As he reached for his phone to document his discovery, the sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Heart pounding, Ethan slipped behind a tall storage cabinet as the laboratory door swung open. 2 security guards entered, flashlights sweeping across the room. Motion sensors were triggered, one said, his voice echoing in the sterile space. Protocol says we check and reset. Middle of the night? Probably another system glitch, the second guard replied, sounding bored. 3rd time this week. Ethan held his breath, pressing himself against the wall as the beams of light passed inches from his hiding place. After what felt like an eternity, the guards completed their cursory inspection. All clear. Let's reset and get back upstairs, the first guard said. I don't like it down here anyway. Gives me the creeps. The door closed behind them with a pneumatic hiss, leaving Ethan alone once more. He waited several minutes before emerging, then quickly took photos of the computer screen showing Sarah's file. He couldn't risk staying longer. The guards might return with more thorough instructions. Dawn was breaking as Ethan drove home, mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Why was Sarah listed as an experimental subject? What was the connection to Madeline Harper? And most importantly, if Sarah had survived her car being found at the abandoned gas station, where was she now? He pulled into his apartment complex's parking lot, exhaustion settling into his bones after the sleepless night. As he climbed the stairs to his second-floor unit, a shadow moved in the hallway. Detective Brooks. Ethan's hand instinctively moved toward his weapon before recognizing Nurse Doreen Jenkins, the elderly woman he'd met in the hospital locker room. She looked even more frail in the harsh morning light, her eyes red-rimmed from what appeared to be days of crying. Mrs. Jenkins, how did you find my address? Phone book, she said simply. May I come in? It's not safe out here. Inside his apartment, Doreen declined coffee but accepted a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped. She carried a small leather-bound book, clutching it to her chest like a talisman. I should have given you this when you first came asking questions, she said finally. But I was scared. We all were. Dr. Hale. He has ways of making problems disappear. She placed the book on the coffee table between them. Sarah's journal. She gave it to me the day before she disappeared, made me promise to keep it safe. Ethan carefully opened the worn cover. The first page bore a simple inscription, "The truth, in my own words. SM." He began to read, and a horrifying picture emerged through Sarah's neat handwriting. Dr. Marcus Hale, celebrated surgeon and hospital benefactor, had been conducting unauthorized experimental treatments on terminal patients, specifically children with aggressive leukemia. 6 months ago, Doreen explained as Ethan turned the pages, Dr. Hale approached Sarah about a special assignment, said her skills were exceptional, that she could be part of something revolutionary. He was developing a new treatment protocol for pediatric leukemia patients who'd exhausted conventional options. According to Sarah's journal, the treatment involved blood transfusions using blood harvested from terminal patients, those declared dead during surgery, but who were, in reality, still alive. He manipulated death certificates, Ethan said, the pieces falling into place. Patients like Douglas Farrington, officially deceased during surgery, but walking out days later. Doreen nodded grimly. Hale was harvesting something from their blood during surgery, antibodies, special cells, something medical I don't fully understand. Then he'd revive them, alter the records, and send them home once they recovered. And he used these harvested materials to treat the children? Yes, the desperate ones, with parents willing to try anything. He told them it was an experimental protocol, got them to sign waivers. What he didn't tell them was that it hadn't been approved by any ethics committee. Ethan turned to the section about Madeline Harper. Sarah's handwriting became more emotional here, the words pressing deeper into the paper. Maddie was special to Sarah, Doreen said softly. She'd been assigned as her primary nurse. That little girl had no one else. Mother dead from overdose, no father in the picture. When the conventional treatments failed, Dr. Hale selected her for his experimental protocol. According to the journal, the treatment seemed miraculous at first. Madeline's cancer began to recede, her blood counts improved. But then came complications, severe immune responses, dangerous fevers. That's when Sarah started asking questions, Doreen continued. Looking at the research data, questioning the methodology. Hale didn't like it. He removed her from Maddie's care team. But Sarah hadn't abandoned Madeline. Instead, she began secretly monitoring the child's treatment, documenting everything. When Hale planned to increase the experimental protocol to potentially dangerous levels, Sarah took drastic action. The final entries in the journal were frantic, the writing rushed and slanted. They're going to kill her with the next treatment. The dosage is too high, but Hale won't listen. Says she's the perfect subject. No family to ask questions if something goes wrong. I can't let this happen. I won't. If they find me, I'll tell them I did it for love. No one will understand, but I would rather disappear than let her die. The last page was stained with what appeared to be dried tears and droplets of blood. She faked Maddie's death, Ethan said, finally understanding. Falsified the records to show the girl had died, then smuggled her out of the hospital. Doreen nodded, placed her at the children's home under a false name. She'd visit after hours, continue the treatments at safer levels. She was planning to get them both away permanently, somewhere Hale couldn't find them. But he discovered what she'd done. Yes, someone tipped him off. Probably saw Sarah visiting Maddie. The night she disappeared, she called me, frantic. Said she had to move Maddie immediately, that they'd been compromised. Doreen's voice broke. She was supposed to call me when they were safe. She never did. Ethan gently closed the journal, his detective's mind processing the implications. This is enough to bring down Hale, the whole operation. Is it? Doreen asked bitterly. A journal with no corroborating evidence? The word of a missing nurse against one of the most powerful men in Lubbock? They'll say she was delusional, that she kidnapped a sick child. They'll make her the villain, detective. She was right, and Ethan knew it. He needed more. Hard evidence that couldn't be explained away. And he needed to find Sarah, if she was still alive. The photo, he said suddenly, retrieving the envelope from his bedroom. Sarah was seen near Sweetwater 3 days after her disappearance. She must have been trying to reach Maddie, to complete their escape. Doreen studied the photo, her aged hands trembling. There's an old hunting cabin near Sweetwater. It belonged to Sarah's grandfather. She mentioned once that it was her safe place, where she went when the world became too much. She looked up at Ethan, hope flickering in her tired eyes. Maybe that's where she was heading. As Ethan prepared to leave, Doreen caught his arm. Detective, be careful. Hale isn't just a doctor with an ego. Whatever he's doing, there's serious money behind it. Pharmaceutical interests, research grants. People have devoted their careers to this project. People who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate threats. Ethan finished for her. Doreen nodded grimly. Find her, detective. Find Sarah and Maddie before they do. The road to Sweetwater stretched before Ethan like a ribbon of faded asphalt, cutting through the flat Texas landscape. He'd left Lubbock at midday, driving his personal vehicle rather than his police cruiser. The less official attention he drew, the better. Sarah's journal lay on the passenger seat beside him, a roadmap to horrors dressed in medical terminology. The sky hung heavy with approaching storm clouds, matching his mood. Fields of cotton and sorghum gave way to more desolate terrain as he drove westward, the vegetation growing sparser, the houses more distant from one another. The isolation was palpable, a reminder of how easy it would be to disappear out here, swallowed by the vastness of rural Texas. His phone rang, Garcia's name flashing on the screen. He hesitated before answering. "Brooks, where the hell are you?" Her voice crackled through the speaker, concern barely masking anger. "You missed the departmental meeting, and the chief is asking questions." "Taking some personal time," Ethan replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Like you suggested." "Bullshit. You're still working the Monroe case, aren't you?" A sigh filtered through the connection. The DA called again. They're talking about temporary suspension if you don't back off. They can have my badge when I get back. Ethan, I found her journal, Garcia. Everything's documented. Hale's experiments, the falsified deaths, all of it. I'm close to finding her. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Finally, Garcia spoke, her voice lowered. Be careful. Just heard from a contact at the hospital. Someone accessed the restricted lab last night. Security footage was conveniently corrupted, but they're pointing fingers at unauthorized police presence. They know it was me, Ethan concluded. And they've got friends in high places looking for you. Watch your back, Brooks. The call ended, leaving Ethan alone with the humming engine and his thoughts. He pressed harder on the accelerator. Sweetwater emerged on the horizon an hour later, a small town that had seen better days. Faded storefronts lined the main street. A few pickup trucks parked outside the local diner. Ethan drove through without stopping, following the coordinates Doreen had provided for the abandoned gas station where Sarah's car had been found. 3 miles outside town, he spotted it. A dilapidated structure with broken windows and a collapsed canopy. Last chance. Gas, the rusted sign proclaimed, though no one had pumped fuel here in decades. Yellow police tape, torn and fluttering in the wind, still marked the spot where Sarah's Honda had been discovered. Ethan parked and approached carefully, scanning for signs of surveillance. The gas station stood silent and empty, dust swirling across the cracked concrete. Inside, the shelves were bare except for scattered debris, the counter stripped of anything valuable long ago. He found the security camera mounted high in one corner, its lens shattered. If it had captured what happened to Sarah, that evidence was long gone. But something caught his eye beneath the counter. A small cooler, the kind used for transporting medical supplies. Ethan knelt down, heart pounding as he pulled it out. The lid was sealed with medical tape, the surface smeared with dried blood. Inside was an empty space shaped to hold a blood bag, and scrawled on the inner lid in hasty handwriting, Ems Harper. Sarah had been here, preparing for a transfusion. For Maddie. As Ethan examined the cooler, his phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. Manager's office back wall. He moved cautiously to the small office behind the counter. Years of dust covered every surface, but someone had recently disturbed the debris. On the back wall hung a faded map of local hunting grounds. Ethan carefully removed it, revealing a small safe embedded in the wall. The safe was old, requiring a 3-digit combination. Ethan thought of Sarah, of the patterns in her life. He tried her birth month and day, 042, nothing. He tried Maddie's age, 007, still nothing. Then he remembered the timestamp that appeared throughout the case, 326, from her final shift log. The safe clicked open. Inside lay a single USB drive and a key with a tag reading, Cabin 17, Sweetwater Ridge. Ethan pocketed both and was heading for the door when the unmistakable sound of tires on gravel froze him in place. Through the grimy window, he saw a black SUV pull up beside his car. 2 men in suits emerged, their movements suggesting concealed weapons and professional training. Ethan ducked down, weighing his options. The front entrance was now blocked. The back door likely led to an alley with no cover. He was trapped. The men approached the building slowly, communicating through hand signals. These weren't local police. They moved with the precision of private security, or worse. A sudden thunderclap shook the building as the storm finally broke. Rain began to pound the roof, providing cover noise as Ethan crept toward the restroom hallway. A small window there, barely large enough for a person, offered his only escape route. He forced it open and squeezed through just as the front door crashed inward. Outside, the rain fell in blinding sheets, drenching him instantly as he ran for the cover of nearby trees. He could hear shouting behind him, but didn't look back, pushing through the underbrush until he reached an old service road. Half a mile later, soaked and breathless, Ethan found an abandoned barn and took shelter. With trembling hands, he inserted the USB drive into his phone. The drive contained surveillance footage, not from the gas station, but from inside Sarah's car. She had placed a small camera on her dashboard, recording everything that happened that night. Ethan watched, transfixed, as the footage played. Sarah driving, constantly checking her rearview mirror. Her voice, tense with fear, as she recorded what would become the message he found on her phone. Then the arrival at the gas station, where she retrieved a cooler from her trunk, the same cooler he'd just found. The footage showed her entering the station, preparing what appeared to be medical equipment, a transfusion setup. Then the sound of another car approaching sent her into panic mode. She hid the cooler, then rushed back to her vehicle. Headlights flooded her car as another vehicle pulled up behind her. A man approached, tall, face obscured by shadows. Words were exchanged, too distant to hear clearly. Then Sarah reached for something in her glove compartment. A flash, the crack of a gunshot. Sarah's scream as she clutched her shoulder, blood seeping through her fingers. The camera tumbled as the car swerved off the road. The last image showed Sarah, wounded but conscious, stumbling away from the vehicle as her pursuer approached. Then the screen went black. Ethan sat in the damp hay, rain drumming on the tin roof above, as lightning illuminated the barn in strobing flashes. Sarah had been shot, but she'd escaped, at least initially, and she'd been preparing a transfusion, likely planning to meet Maddie here. He checked the key in his pocket. Cabin 17, Sweetwater Ridge. According to the map he'd seen at the gas station, the hunting cabins were less than 5 miles away, nestled in the wooded hills overlooking the town. As the storm raged outside, Ethan made his decision. He couldn't go back to his car. Hale's men would be watching it. He'd have to continue on foot, using the storm as cover. For the first time since the investigation began, he felt a glimmer of hope beneath his exhaustion and fear. Sarah Monroe had survived that night. She'd planned meticulously, leaving breadcrumbs for someone to follow. She'd trusted that someone would care enough to look for her. Through the rain and darkness, Ethan Brooks began the long walk to Sweetwater Ridge. Case number 2019-0734, Sarah Monroe, missing person. Status, inactive. The words glared at Ethan from his computer screen, clinical and final. 6 weeks had passed since his desperate journey to Sweetwater Ridge, where he'd found cabin 17 empty, its floor stained with what lab tests later confirmed was Sarah's blood. 6 weeks since the DA had officially closed the case, citing insufficient evidence to proceed, despite the journal, the video, and everything else Ethan had uncovered. 6 weeks since Lieutenant Garcia had found him a sympathetic department psychiatrist who suggested stress leave as an alternative to the termination papers that had been prepared. The clock on his apartment wall ticked loudly in the silence. 3:26 p.m. The time haunted him now. Ethan rubbed his eyes, fatigue settling in his bones like an old friend. His apartment had become a war room, walls covered with timelines, photographs, and connections that made sense only to him. The rest of the force thought he'd gone off the deep end, obsessed with a case that higher powers had determined wasn't worth pursuing. His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. The screen showed Lubbock Children's Home. "Detective Brooks," he answered, trying to keep the desperate hope from his voice. "Detective, this is Corinne Michaels from Social Services." The woman's voice was professional but warm. "I'm calling about Maggie Wilson, the child you expressed concern about during your visit." Ethan's heart raced. "Maddie, is she all right?" "She's been placed with a foster family. Very experienced couple, specialized in children with medical needs." A pause. "The reason I'm calling, she's been asking for you. Says you're a friend of her, Tia Sarah." He gripped the phone tighter. "I'd like to see her." "Normally, this would be highly irregular," Corinne admitted. "But given the circumstances, and her doctor thinks familiar connections might help her emotional recovery." They arranged a meeting for that afternoon at the foster family's home, a modest ranch-style house on the outskirts of Lubbock, surrounded by sprawling yards and pecan trees. As Ethan parked in the driveway, he noticed the security cameras discreetly positioned around the property's perimeter. Not standard for foster homes, he noted. Someone was taking Maddie's protection seriously. The foster mother, Ellen Reeves, greeted him warmly. "She's been so excited about your visit," she said, leading him through a cozy living room filled with children's books and toys. "Fair warning, she'll talk your ear off about the ocean. It's her current obsession." Maddie sat in a sunny back porch, coloring intently in a marine life coloring book. She looked healthier than when Ethan had last seen her. Her cheeks had more color, her green eyes brighter. The blue knit cap was gone, replaced by short blonde hair just beginning to grow back. She looked up when Ethan entered, her face lighting up with recognition. "Detective Brooks, you came." "I promised I would," he said, taking a seat in the child-sized chair she offered. "How are you feeling, Maddie?" "Better," she proclaimed proudly, showing him her arm. The bandages were gone, replaced by a small, circular Band-Aid. "My blood counts are up. That means the medicine is working." "That's wonderful news." Maddie leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Mr. and Mrs. Reeves are nice. He's a doctor too, but not like the scary ones. He does my treatments here instead of the hospital." Ethan raised an eyebrow at this. Foster parents providing medical treatments was unusual, to say the least. As if reading his thoughts, Ellen explained from the doorway. "My husband is an oncologist. Special arrangement through the court system, given Maddie's unique situation." Before Ethan could probe further, Maddie tugged his sleeve. "I want to show you something." She reached beneath her chair and pulled out a worn leather journal, Sarah's journal, which Ethan had submitted as evidence and which had subsequently disappeared from the police evidence room. "How did you get this?" he asked, stunned. Maddie shrugged. "The nice lady brought it. Said Tia Sarah would want me to have it." "What nice lady, Maddie?" "The one who visits sometimes when I'm sleeping. Mrs. Reeves says it's just dreams, but I know she's real." Ethan glanced at Ellen, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Tia Sarah used to read to me from this," Maddie continued, carefully opening the journal to reveal pages of scientific notes interspersed with more personal entries. "She said sometimes the best stories are the true ones, even when they're scary." She flipped to a dog-eared page with a pressed flower tucked inside. "This is my favorite part. She wrote it just for me." Ethan gently took the journal, reading the passage Maddie indicated. "My dearest Maddie, sometimes in life we face storms so fierce they threaten to sweep us away. In those moments, we must be like the sea, powerful and deep, with mysteries hidden beneath our surface. The ocean doesn't fear the storm. It embraces it, knowing that even the wildest waves eventually calm. You asked me once why we couldn't just tell everyone the truth. I wish it were that simple. Some truths must wait for the right moment when the world is ready to hear them. Until then, we protect them in our hearts, like shells holding the sound of distant waves. When you close your eyes and think of me, imagine the hospital machines becoming the rhythm of the sea. Someday, I promise, we'll stand together on a real shore, feeling sand between our toes and salt spray on our faces. Until then, be brave, my little mermaid. The ocean is patient, and so am I." Ethan blinked back unexpected tears as he finished reading. The entry revealed a depth of love he hadn't fully appreciated before. Sarah's devotion to this child who had no one else in the world. "Do you think she's at the ocean now?" Maddie asked, her small face serious. Before Ethan could formulate a response that balanced truth and hope, a notification chimed on his phone. An email from an encrypted address containing only a video file. "May I?" he asked Ellen, who nodded and escorted Maddie inside for a snack. Ethan opened the file with trembling fingers. The video showed a beach at sunset, waves rolling gently against pristine sand. The camera panned slowly, eventually revealing a woman standing at the water's edge, her back to the viewer. Though her hair was different, shorter, darker, the posture was unmistakable. Sarah Monroe turned slightly, just enough to show her profile against the setting sun. She held up a small sign, "M, when you're ready, S." The video ended there, its message clear to anyone who knew what to look for. Sarah was alive, somewhere by the ocean, waiting for Maddie when she was well enough to travel. Ellen returned, finding Ethan staring at his now dark phone screen. "The case was officially closed last month," she said quietly. "No suspects, no charges." "Hale got away with it," Ethan replied bitterly. "Did he?" Ellen raised an eyebrow. His research funding was mysteriously pulled. The pharmaceutical company backing his work abruptly withdrew support, citing ethical concerns. His tenure review is under scrutiny. Sometimes justice takes different forms. She handed Ethan a cup of coffee. "My husband and I were approached by a medical ethics foundation. They're documenting everything: Maddie's treatment, her recovery, the experimental protocol, building a case slowly, carefully. That could take years. Some truths must wait for the right moment," Ellen quoted from Sarah's journal. Maddie is safe. She's getting proper treatment. And when she's stronger, the ocean is patient, Ethan finished. Later, as he prepared to leave, Maddie hugged him tightly. Tia Sarah said that when I closed my eyes and thought of her, the sound of the machines would turn into the sound of the sea. Ethan knelt to her level. What do you hear now? Maddie closed her eyes, a peaceful smile spreading across her face. Waves, she whispered. I hear the waves calling me home. He watched her return to her coloring as rain began to fall outside. Gentle drops that reminded him of tears, not of sadness, but of release. The case file might be stamped inactive, but the truth was very much alive, protected by a network of silent guardians who believed justice was worth the wait. As Ethan drove away from the foster home, he passed a car identical to Sarah's Honda Civic, its windows fogged by the unexpected spring rain. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he glimpsed a woman with honey-brown hair behind the wheel. By the time he looked back, the car had turned onto another street, disappearing like a ghost in the mist. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, the last message he would ever receive from it. 3:26 a.m., end of my shift, beginning of my choice. Some choices in life aren't between right and wrong, but between unthinkable sacrifices. Sarah Monroe faced such a decision that night at 3:26 a.m., continue participating in a system that would sacrifice a child for scientific advancement or risk everything to save one life the world had already written off as expendable. What would you have done in her place? Would you have had the courage to walk away from your career, your safety, your entire identity, all for a child with no blood connection to you? In a world that often values progress over compassion and profit over people, Sarah's choice reminds us that true heroism rarely makes headlines. It lives in the quiet moments of sacrifice, in decisions made at empty gas stations in the middle of the night, in promises kept to those society has forgotten. Perhaps the most profound acts of love are the ones that remain unseen, except by those whose lives are forever changed by them. Just as Sarah became Maddie's ocean, bringing hope to a seemingly hopeless situation, we too can be that force of change in someone's life, even when justice seems distant or delayed. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that one person's courage can make all the difference. Let us know in the comments what you would have risked everything for. Remember, sometimes the bravest choice isn't fighting the storm, it's becoming the ocean, patient, powerful, and filled with mysteries worth protecting.